Welcome to the Most Days Show. The mission of Most Days is to measurably increase quality of life globally by helping people change their habits. This show is devoted to understanding how change happens. Today, we speak with Dr. Bella DePaulo about single life. She's been described by The Atlantic as America's foremost thinker and writer on the single experience. Dr. DePaulo coined the term single at heart, which is the title of her new book that's available for pre-order now. She's been published by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time, The Atlantic, and appeared on The Today Show, CNN, CBS, and Good Morning America. She's a really wonderful thinker on this topic, and I think it's an important topic. As we delved into the discussion, it became clear to me that I wasn't aware of how singles are perceived, about the stigma about being single. I've had some experience with this. My mother is single and she has spoken about it. And I don't think that I ever truly understood how we societally have preference for people that are coupled, and how that shouldn't be the case, how it shouldn't really be relevant whether you are single or in a relationship or what kind of relationship you're in. So I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you do as well. Bella DePaulo, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I've been excited for our conversation because you have written a book called Single at Heart, which we'll get into, but it's about being single and how society thinks about people who are single and like all things singledom, if that's a word. And the reason I've been excited about this is my mom is single and she has been for some number of years. And she constantly complains that like people don't get it. They don't understand what it's like to be single. All of her friends who are coupled up, they don't quite understand. And so I feel like in having this conversation with you, I'm doing justice to mom, who I love and, want to understand.
That's a great
more.
Motivation. And your mother is right. A lot of people who aren't single really don't get it.
So tell us about your background and what led to writing your upcoming book, Single at Heart.
I'm 70 years old and I have been single my entire life. And I've been single because I want to be, because I love being single. I never thought, oh, gee, if only I get married, I'll live happily ever after. I was already living happily ever after. And yet, I never saw that reflected back to me in movies or TV shows or literature, or even for a long time in scholarly writings. You just don't hear about single people who find single life fulfilling, meaningful, psychologically rich. And when people feel that way, I call them single at heart. Single life is their best life. They're powerfully drawn to it, not because they're fleeing how bad romantic relationships can be. That's not the reason. The reasons are positive ones, that single life has a lot to offer. When I was just not seeing anything like that, that really frustrated it and annoyed me. So, for example, when people wrote books about single people, they'd say things like, let me teach you how to be happily single while you're looking for love. Well, I'm already happily single. Or they'd say things like, when you're single, you can work on yourself, and then you'll be more attractive as a potential romantic partner. Well, I don't want to work on myself so somebody will want me. I want to be the best, most authentic person I can be, and not for some potential romantic partner. So Single at Heart is, I think, the first book that really dispenses with all this nonsense about how single life is second rate and you should feel sorry for yourself if you're single. I mean, there are a lot of things in society that make it hard for people to be single, for sure. But even so, single people can be very happy. And I want to convey that and validate the people who feel the same way I do, but have never heard their own stories reflected back to them.
Wonderful. And can we start? I'd like to talk a lot about why being single at heart is wonderful, as you're alluding to. But can we start with maybe talking about why marriage isn't wonderful? I mean, can we take the angle of saying, like, what do we we put marriage up on this pedestal and we believe it to be one thing, but in reality it's a different thing. So what are the insights that you've gleaned about the state of modern marriages?
Yeah, so there are two parts to that. One is what you just said, that marriage often isn't all that it's cracked up to be. But the other part is that the point of my Single at Heart book isn't putting down marriage. It's saying that some people are powerfully drawn to single life. They will live their most meaningful, fulfilling life by staying single, just as other people are drawn to coupled life. So I'm not saying, oh, if you're coupled, you're doing life wrong. I'm saying that make room for people who would live their best life by staying single and not always doubting themselves and thinking, oh, everybody else thinks that marriage is the royal road to happiness. Maybe I have to get married. And a lot of people have ended up married just because it's what they think they should do. They think there's something wrong with them if they like being single. I mean, can you imagine that? I like to read sometimes advice columnists, and people will write in and they'll say, I'm really happy with my single life. I like my alone time. I like hanging out with my friends. I like reading. But I don't know. Does that mean there's something wrong with me? Imagine that, having a life that you love and feeling so insecure about it that you write to an advice columnist and say, what's wrong with me that I love my life? That's ridiculous. But the other part is where you started. So modern marriage is different from what it was about a half century ago. Now people think like those song lyrics, like, you are my everything. I want you to be my everything. So they think that their romantic partner, their spouse, is going to be, their best friend and their travel companion and their co-parent if they're going to have kids, and of course their sex partner and their confidant and every imaginable role. But that's a lot to put on one person. In my mother's and father's generation, it wasn't like that. I mean, they would each spend time with their friends. My mother was really close to her sisters, and that wasn't considered wrong. And that no romantic partner, no spouse would feel threatened by a wife or a husband who wanted to spend time doing something other than being glued at the hip with their spouse. So that too, that kind of intensive coupling, that looking to your partner to be your everything, is kind of risky. Because if you do that, if you seriously look to your partner to be your everything, and not all couples do that.
What I don't think you're saying, but I think is worth clarifying is, when you're vulnerable, you're taking risk. And yes, if you get into a marriage, somebody might die or somebody might break up with you or whatever. There might be some heartbreak. That's not a reason not to do it in the first place. And to be clear, I don't come at this in like defense of marriage. I'm married.
Yeah.
I don't have a dog in the fight. But if I played back the other side of that, you wouldn't argue, hey, I'm single because I don't want to take any risk.
Oh, no, absolutely
this man
not.
Can't get hurt.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And single people often form deep bonds with friends and relatives and special people in their lives. So it's not about that. What I was saying is that if you do marriage or romantic coupling in a certain way, for example, you get involved with someone, you get totally enamored of them, and you demote your friends. So now you either, only see them for lunch instead of dinner, or you hardly see them at all, and then they sort of fade out of your life. Then you are especially vulnerable if something happens to your romantic relationship. And again, I'm still not saying that That's a reason not to do it. If you like doing coupling in that intensive way, then go for it. I mean, my whole thing is do the life that makes you feel fulfilled, the life that is authentic for you. But I think that the way coupling and single life is portrayed, we hear mostly about the joys of coupling and the sorrows and the risks of staying single. And I think that both couple life and single life have joys and they both have challenges. But the way the popular culture is narrated, the way our everyday assumptions are built, they're focused on what's great about being married or romantically coupled and what's awful about being single. And both of those things can't happen. But I want to give voice to the other things that can happen, that you can be happily single and fulfilled and joyful, whereas you can be unhappily married. So it's not that I'm portraying, one is good and the other is bad. It's that there are challenges and joys to both, but our cultural conversations have not been even-handed about that. And that people differ in the kinds of lives that suit them, that make them feel most fulfilled, that make them feel most like themselves. And for a lot of people, that's being romantically coupled and creating a conventional life around marriage and maybe kids and nuclear family. But there are a lot of other people who thrive when they stay single. And I want those people to feel validated too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through this thought exercise for myself. I'm divorced and remarried, and I have a 7-year-old with my first wife. I've often thought, I mean, I'm happy. I love my current wife, and I love my current situation. I'm really grateful for my life. But yeah, and I've talked to my wife about this, but I'm like, oh, in some parallel universe, I didn't fall in love with you, and I'm single. And actually, for me, if we want to do, there's a different path for everybody. I'm like, that parallel universe is probably pretty good because I'm a dad and I have this really rich relationship with my daughter. But half the time I'm just doing my thing and I've got like a maximum freedom that's not tethered to a relationship or anything else. So again, I'm appreciative for what I have, but when I think about that parallel universe, I'm like, oh, that wouldn't have been so bad. I'd be really bummed to have not met my current wife, but I'm like, I think I could have been pretty happy there. The question I have maybe is around, the basic things that a partnership can provide. So maybe we just kind of go through them one at a time. How do you think about in the single at heart life, intimacy, and like physical connection? Like what role does that play? And how do you think about that outside of the confines of, a coupled life?
One thing that's consistent across being single at heart is that we have more expansive, inclusive views of concepts like intimacy and family and love. So intimacy can include sexual intimacy, but it also can include emotional closeness, the kinds of feelings you might have for close friends or special relatives. And it can include, hugging and touching and the kind of intimacy that isn't always sexual, although for many single at heart people, there are sexual components too. So it's not just, if you don't do it like married couples do, then you're missing something. In fact, it can be a more expansive way of thinking about love and family and intimacy. So take family, for example. If you're single at heart and you love your single life, you might still love your people who are regarded as family. So your parents or your siblings or your kids, if you have kids. But you might also really cherish other people and see them as family. maybe close friends or confidants, people who really matter to you. Maybe friends who have been with you and in your life longer than many people's spouses have been in their life. And some people call that chosen family. They're the families we choose. And so those are important too. Or take the idea of love. You know, when these books say, let me teach you how to be single while looking for love. Well, that's a very narrow, stingy way of thinking about love. Love isn't just romantic love. Love can be love of friends. It can be love of spiritual figures. It can be love of pets. It can be love of the planet. There are so many kinds of love that it's just limiting to say, oh, let me tell you how to be single while you're looking for love, and mean that there's only one kind of love. Of course there's not.
Just a quick break to spend a few seconds asking for your help. We do not have ads on this podcast or in the Most Days app, and so are member supported. You can support what we're doing here by downloading the Most Days app, which is currently available on iOS and soon on Android. There you'll find a flexible contribution system through which you can support us at a level that makes sense for you. Thank you so much to those who have contributed and everyone else for considering it. And then what about children? And how do you think about, having offspring? I mean, that'd be the traditional role of marriage from an evolutionary sense, is you partner up, you build a unit, you procreate, your genes get passed on, you protect one another until that happens, and then, it happens again. So how do you think about, if you're single at heart, approaching, children, no children? What's the optionality there?
There are different ways that children fit into the lives of people who are single at heart. Some have children of their own. Single parenting is much less unusual today than it was, say, a half century ago. There are challenges for single people, and not the ones that you usually think of. Oh, there's no co-parent, so the kid is deprived. Well, people who are single and raising children often create their own village. They have other people who are part of their children's life. I think that in talking to people who have children, and I don't, but people who are single at heart who have children tell me that there are wonderful advantages, that they build special bonds with their children when it's just the two of them. And they also say that their children are, in a way, protected. They are never going to go through the distress of having their parents divorce or having their parents fight over them or use them as pawns in arguments. And I'm not saying everyone who divorces does that. Of course they don't. But it's a kind of risk that the children of single parents don't have. And their parents feel that they can raise them according to their own values without kind of, having to compromise with the values of a partner that they might not totally agree with. And again, I'm not saying that all partnerships are like that. Some of them really do agree on it, and that's great. But I think that the message of single at heart, single parenting is that all the scare stories we hear about it and, oh, the kids are at risk and all that kind of stuff, it's really one-sided, and it doesn't consider the kids who thrive when they are in a single-parent family. In fact, there's this great study of like 10 different kinds of households or families. So it's, the conventional married parents with kids and single parents who have never been married but live in a multi-generational household, or, every imaginable combination you can think of. And what they found was the single parents who were raising their kids in a multi-generational household, say, living with grandparents, those kids were actually doing better than the children of traditional, mom, dad, and the kids nuclear family households. So I think we're just missing some of the good parts. And again, I'm not saying, oh, every kid should be raised by single parents or, being raised by married parents is a bad thing. Of course not. But I'm saying that we've been sold a bill of goods where we only hear about, oh, those poor children of single parents and those awesome married parents. And, it's kind of like this magical love, two-parent family where both parents are always engaged and present for their children and never in conflict with each other, never in a bad mood, never cold or cruel or anything else like that. And of course, there are some wonderful families and couples that create wonderful environments for their children, but no couples, no families are perfect. There are tensions within families that look like they meet the ideal. And we need to acknowledge that and not just keep dumping on single parents and their children.
I totally agree. And a lot of this reminds me, I think maybe more of my own experience than I had expected, because I think some of this you could swap out like divorce and you could say, hey, it's okay. It happens. Kids are okay. And we think of the married couple that doesn't get divorced as like so much better than the divorced couple. But what I had realized when we were in the process of being divorced, and again, this is from the perspective of kind of coupledom. I'm not saying anything about the single version of this, but I had kind of stack ranked, and I thought, okay, I think my daughter's mom and I together and happy, that's probably best. But if that can't be true, what's second best is not together and unhappy.
Exactly.
What's second best is apart and happy.
Yeah.
And maybe, what matters most as we think about raising children is like, is the parent or the parents, are they healthy? Are they happy? Do they care about the child? And if they're not, couple or not, you're probably not going to be the best parent. And if they are, you can probably be a pretty damn good parent. And then the second thing that I realized in being a single father, and I was half-time, single fathers, that'd be different than being 100% single father. You realize your mom and dad, I picked up all of these mom skills that I did not appreciate about mothers. I realized when I was with my friends, I'm like, wait, I'm holding a different set of things about my toddler at the time in my head than my coupled friends are. I'm aware, like, okay, we're leaving the house. When did they last go to the bathroom? When did they have the nap? Do we have a snack? Is it a snack they're currently eating? Do they have a backup snack? And I remember this is all very typical, like, I'm stereotyping moms and dads. I know there's a whole bunch of ways you can kind of slice the apple. And I would look at my friends and I would kind of think of them as like that bumbling dad. I'm like, dude, your daughter hasn't liked those snacks for like 3 weeks. And if we don't bring a backup snack, we're going to have a tantrum, like all this mom stuff. And I had a totally new appreciation for the mom skills. And I would assume if my ex-wife were here, she would say that, she's got a new appreciation for the dad skills. And and maybe the last thing I'll say about this, just to kind of bring it all together, we're so lucky to be in a place where we can live our lives in so many of these ways. If we were to go back 1,000 years, it's probably not advisable to live the single life in some way. Like there's some protection that the couple provides or that the community provides or whatever. It's a much more kind of natural environment. Now we've been able to take ourselves to a place where it's like, look, we can slice this thing 100 different ways because I don't know, the tiger is not going to jump out of the bushes and kill us. We don't need to sit back to back and protect one another from the elements. It's really beautiful that there are so many different ways that we can live our lives and be healthy and thrive. So I've just ranted a little bit, but it reminds me of the divorced experience.
Yeah. And even not going back 1,000 years, going back half century, it was harder for women to stay single because they felt economically tethered to a husband for financial life support. They weren't making enough money to support themselves. And now, even when they're getting paid less than men, many have the financial resources to support themselves and maybe some kids if they want kids too. So that in itself is a very big boost to the possibility of living single and flourishing. And similarly, advances in reproductive medicine means you can have sex without having kids, and you can have kids without having sex, and you don't need a spouse for any of that. So that's another advance. And I think also having sex. A half century ago, it was shameful to have sex outside of marriage, even though lots of people did anyway. They tried to hide it. Now it's almost like it's more embarrassing not to have sex than to have sex outside of marriage. So all of these kinds of developments make it much more possible today to flourish when you're single than it was true, 50 years ago. Even thinking about the proliferation of restaurants and takeout and even in grocery stores, the dinners that you can pick up and take home, or if you don't like to clean and you have the financial resources to do it, you can hire people to clean your house. So all these things that used to be all tied up in marriage and family have now come apart, and you can create the life you want.
Maybe we talk about where there's more progress yet to make. So in what ways do contemporary societal structures prioritize couples over singles?
Oh my gosh, just about every domain of life. Let's start with the really big ones. Advantaging of legally married couples and disadvantaging of anyone who's not is built right into the laws of our land. There are hundreds of laws that benefit and protect only people who are legally married. And that was one of the incentives, one of the motivations for the people who fought so hard to get same-sex marriage legalized. Of course, there were other reasons too, but getting that marriage legalized just ripped open a whole cornucopia of benefits and protections that you don't get if you're legally single. So here's a really big one. I can work side by side with a married colleague for the same number of years at the same job, and I can even do a better job. And yet, we're both putting money into Social Security, but when my married colleague dies, their money can go to their spouse or, in some qualifying conditions, to a whole series of ex-spouses, whereas my money goes back to the system. Well, I earned that money. Why can't I designate a sibling or a special friend or someone who really needs it to get that money? Well, I can't, and no one can name me as a beneficiary of their Social Security benefits. Or think also about workplaces where married workers are allowed to put their spouse on a health care plan at a reduced rate. Well, that's a huge benefit. If I can't put anyone on my health care plan at a reduced rate, then my total compensation for doing the same job is less than my married colleague. That is just deeply unfair. So that's starting with the legal things. Then you can think about the marketplace. Think about all the things like memberships and cultural events and travel packages that are priced by the couple. So that is saying we expect everybody to be coupled. Or when they do specify prices for the individual, it's more per person. So, for example, if tickets to an event are $100 per couple, but $60 for single people are subsidizing the married people who already have more money because they have all these breaks and because they're often living together and sharing expenses. Well, why am I subsidizing them? And anyway, I already gave them a generous wedding present. So get over yourselves.
I was trying to think of what the reason, like I was trying to do the okay, what's the reason that that would be the case that is, I don't know, justifiable? And in doing that, it strikes me that maybe this is one of the areas in which discrimination is still like truly on the books. It feels like with gender equality and with
Yes.
civil rights that we still have a lot of societal issues. There's racism, there's sexism, there's bigotry, but that it's largely off the books. It's largely not written into the law if we look at the Western world, basically.
Yes.
And in this case, and that's not to say there's not more to do. I'm not saying that we've arrived at some perfect utopia on those issues. Of course, we have not. But in this case, it seems it's still written into the books. Is there anything else that still feels like on the books in that way from a discriminatory perspective?
Yeah, but let me say something else about that too, which is that not only is it still on the books, but people tend to think there's nothing wrong with discriminating against single people. So let me give you this example of a study I did with my colleagues, Wendy Morris and Stacy Sinclair. So we told our study participants about these rental agents who had, or about a landlord who had a property to rent. And in some conditions, we said the landlord had two people interested in it. One was Black, the other was white. The Black person offered to pay more, but the landlord liked renting to white people. And so they accepted the white person. Why do you think that is? And the answer would be obvious. They're prejudiced. That's unfair. Then we did the same thing with a man and a woman wanted to rent the place. The woman offered to pay more, but they chose the man. Or a gay or lesbian person and a straight person wanted to rent the place, but the gay or lesbian person offered to pay more, but the landlord liked renting to straight people, so they rented to the straight person. So we did, I don't know, I think 5 or 6 different permutations. Then we did one more. The landlord has a married couple and a pair of friends who would like to rent, and the pair of friends offers to pay more, but the landlord likes married people better, so chooses to rent to the married person. And then we asked, why do you think that happened? And they said, because they're married. And that was a reasonable explanation. I mean, they would never say, well, the reason and they didn't say the reason that the landlord chose the white person over the Black person who offered to pay more is because they're white. You wouldn't say that. You know that is an example of discrimination, of bigotry, of unfairness.
Do you see a relationship between sexual orientation and singledom or being single at heart, or sexual preference? What is is there no correlation?
Yes, there is some. So people who are single at heart are more likely to be gay or lesbian, etc., than people who are not single at heart, even though most are straight. And they are also more likely to be asexual or aromantic, not by a huge amount, but more than the baseline number of people. So asexual people are people who are not sexually attracted or are not very sexually attracted to particular other people. There was a great quip about this on Twitter, which I'm not going to call X. If you don't understand what it means to be asexual, think about someone you're not sexually attracted to. Now imagine that's how you feel about everyone. The end.
And then what do you see in terms of health factors, life expectancy, I don't know, rates of addiction, mental health, like better, worse, the same?
Let me talk first about single people in general rather than single at heart. There is this rock solid belief that a lot of social scientists perpetuate that if you get married, you'll be healthier. And one way they try to say that this is true is to compare the health of people who are married to people who are not married. That is leaving out or putting in with the not married, the people who got married and got divorced. And not because marriage was making them healthier. So I like to call that the cheater technique, where you pretend that, oh, the only married people who count are the ones who are still married or currently married.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you really want to know, does getting married make you healthier? Then you want the kind of study that follows people across their lives and looks at whether the single people who get married become healthier. And some of the best studies that have been done about that are over the longest periods of time and national samples and all that, show that the single people who get married do not become healthier than when they were single. And in fact, in one of the studies, they become a little less healthy. And those studies, by necessity, only include people who want to marry, right? They decide to do it. Suppose I, as a person who is single at heart, somehow was forced or pressured to marry. I don't think that would make me healthier, even if it made a lot of other people healthier. So again, we need to think about the ways in which humans differ. We're not all the same. And the kind of life that might be healthy and happy for some people is going to be miserable for others. And part of the reason people stay in unhappy marriages is because single life is so stigmatized and so misrepresented. So I think people really believe, oh my gosh, if I get divorced, I am going to be miserable. I'm going to be isolated. I'm just going to have a terrible life. And there are risks, of course. And some of them are just social norms that really need to change. So, for example, if you have friends as a married couple, and then when you get divorced, it's like the friends get divvied up. One person takes the guy if it's a heterosexual marriage, and the other one takes one. Well, why do you have to claim only one person? Why can't you stay friends with both of them? So there are risks, and there are also risks that involve things that some coupled people do, which is, when they get coupled, they demote their single friends, so they don't see them very much anymore. Well, then, when they're divorced, where are those people? They already put them on their back burner, and now they're trying to reclaim them.
Yeah, and it strikes me that it's particularly stigmatized and unfair to women who are middle-aged or older, that group in particular has it worse than, say, their counterparts who are male. I think about my mom in this situation. She just turned 69. And in a parallel universe, if she's a single male 69-year-old, I think there's stigma in both cases, but it strikes me that there's more stigma in her case than his case in the parallel universe. Do we see that that's true?
Yes, I think there is. And men remarry at a greater rate than women do. But, the irony of that is that women who are newly single, such as, the women who are now divorced, are probably doing better than the men, because for one thing, they often were the social organizers of life. So they were the ones who kept up with other people. They are more likely to have friends than the married guy, who stereotypically and often in fact looks to their wife to be their everything, or to, if they're going to socialize, the wife will organize the socializing. But women are more likely, even married women are more likely to stay in touch with their friends, so that when they're single again, they have those people in their lives. And I think, single women also like their solitude more. They like being alone. There are studies of people who do this thing called living apart together, which means they're a couple, they're committed to each other, but they want their own place. And it doesn't mean they want their own place because they want to fool around and not get caught. They like their solitude, or they like their privacy, or they like getting to fashion a home by their own heart. And what research on that has found is that more often, it's the woman in heterosexual couples. It's the woman who wants to do that more than the guy. The guy wants to live together.
Yeah, I feel like we hear more. I mean, this is just anecdotal, but you would hear somebody speaking about their parents, and it would be more common to hear, oh, dad would be screwed without mom.
Yeah.
Then, oh, mom would be screwed without dad. I think you actually hear the opposite joke, where it's a little bit of like, oh, mom would totally thrive without dad. Particularly the conversations about people who are in retirement. It's just much more common that you would hear, oh, dad would be a mess, or we wouldn't know what to do with dad.
I was first introduced to that when my father died, and he died before my mother. And I got this sympathy card that said, when my father died, my mother thrived. And I thought, what a bizarre way to express sympathy. And I didn't understand it. And then, like a week later, I got another sympathy card that said the same thing. And now, all these years later, I get it. It's like, it doesn't necessarily mean that the woman was miserable in their marriage. They might have actually had a loving, valued marriage. But when they're on their own, they start to understand or be more in touch with who they really are, what their preferences are, what they like to do. And they might find that they learn things and do things that they hadn't done when they were coupled, because maybe their spouse didn't like those things, or maybe they realized that they actually like having time alone, or they like their freedom, they like their independence. I think that's really telling, and I think it's one of the reasons why even people who were married and happily married might find that single at heart is something that resonates with them. In fact, that is what made me sure I was right, because the skepticism I got, especially early on, was, there aren't really people who are single at heart. They just haven't met the right person. And in my research and interviewing people, I have found people who really did find the love of their life, have no complaints, maybe got married, lived with the person, and it just wasn't right. They had no complaints about this person, but it just didn't feel right. Like someone said, it was like the wrong size of shoes. And yet there is like no concept out there before single at heart that says some people really do flourish when they are single. And it's not because they haven't met the right person, or they don't really understand themselves, or they're fooling themselves, or they just had such terrible experiences. None of that matters. They are thriving when single because that is the life that is most meaningful, most fulfilling for them, just as couple life is most meaningful and most fulfilling for other people.
And maybe it's a symptom of it feels like the central theme of your message, which is, look, there's a whole bunch of different ways to be happy. And you can be happy single, you can be happy as a couple. And like, let's be open to the fact and accepting of the fact that there's a whole bunch of ways to be happy. And because in a world where we really look at the heterosexual relationship where you have a couple of kids, what happens is people sacrifice themselves to fit the mold. And they give, they sacrifice things to fit into that mold. And that might not be the best mold for everybody. And I think in particular, back to the point we're talking about with my mom and older women in particular, I think being stigmatized the most here is, and in that construct, historically, women have probably sacrificed more than anybody else in the like mom, dad, married, 2.5 kids construct. And it's really nice that this is changing. I mean, I can even say I grew up in a liberal place in Boulder in Colorado, and I'm 41 now, and my daughter is 7, but there are so many different kids at school in terms of their families. It's like so-and-so's got 2 moms, so-and-so's got 2 dads, so-and-so's parents are divorced, so-and-so's just got a dad, so-and-so's just got a mom. There's a bunch of racial diversity that there wasn't when I was growing up, because I'm also raising her here in Boulder. I moved back. It's a really beautiful thing about the progress we've made, and how we're letting people, how society is saying, hey, we can, we're being more accepting of living our lives in a whole bunch of different ways. Lots more progress to make. We have not arrived at some utopia. What are you seeing in terms of the global shifts away from nuclear families and acceptance of this kind of message?
Yes, for sure. All around the world, more people are staying single, and even people who do eventually marry are getting to it later than they once were. So, for example, in the United States, the average age at which women first marry is about 28, and for men, it's a little over 30. That means that half of all men who marry for the first time are older than 30, which is a huge difference from, say, 1956, when women were 20 years old when they married for the first time, as opposed to 28 now, and men were 22 instead of 30. So when you have, your whole 20s for being single, and most other people are too, that's a whole different world than when, you get to 20, 22 and just about everybody's married or headed that way. That's very different. The other part of it is kids. So more and more adults are not having kids. So you can be married and have kids, or you can be married and not have kids, or you can be single and have kids, or single and not have kids. And if you aren't married and you don't have kids, then of course you're not going to live in a nuclear family. So that opens the door to a proliferation of all different kinds of innovative ways to live. So some people love living alone. I'm one of them. Some people like living in community, say something like a co-housing community where everyone has their own place, but their houses are arranged in a community-like fashion, so that you run into people in your everyday life, and maybe you have some meals together, or you have some common space where you can meet together. Other ways of doing it are more informal. So I wrote this book called How We Live Now, Rewriting Marriage and Family for the 21st Century. And I found, for example, 2 widowed women who lived right next door to each other. So they had their own places, but they saw each other all the time. And, they could look out the window and see if the light is still on, or they can do things together. Another pair of divorced women got a duplex together. And so they each had their own side of the house, but they were on the same property. And some people want to live together, Golden Girls style. So this evolution of the way we live away from, the 1950s model, which, by the way, was unusual rather than typical. Our evolution away from that has generated a whole series of innovative ways of thinking about how to live.
Yeah, and I wonder, I say this, I think it's tongue in cheek. I don't know that I'm going to totally stand behind this, but I think it's a funny thought exercise. Is maybe the most progressive way to do this is some blend of the old and new. So I think about, okay, 50 years ago, Brent would have had kids at 22, and now at 41, like, kids out of the house.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some world in which the best way to do it is to have kids young, you get them out of the house by 40, then you get divorced and you live your single at heart life. And you just you just have a little bit of everything.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's one version. And I think what's really good is getting to choose your version. So whatever works best for you, go for it. And if your version of what you really want to do is be married with kids, you have all this societal support and respect and celebration. What needs to change is that we're more affirming and celebratory and validating of people who don't want to do the standard thing, who feel fulfilled doing something different.
Yeah, and I agree. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. So what can we do to support, to be a part of the solution, I guess I would say? My mom will say, my couple's friends, they're always inviting each other to things. They forget about the single friend. And so there's this, invite the singles if you're a couple in the same way you would invite another couple friend. They're fine coming alone. And in fact, they're probably more secure than anybody else is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how can we be a part of the solution and getting rid of the stigma and supporting anybody in our life who's single?
That's a great example of not demoting your single friends when you get coupled. I mean, include them. When I was, people always think, oh, single people are lonely, but I rarely feel lonely. What I have felt marginalized and hurt by my friends who got coupled and then demoted me. that is hurtful. Now I've gotten over it because I think that's on them. It's they should be embarrassed to do that. A lot of these people think of themselves as very progressive and open-minded, but none of them would ever say, oh, I think I'll have a dinner party and invite only white people. You wouldn't do that, but they will outright say, I've had people who are couples in front of me say, I'm going to have a dinner party for couples next weekend. And I just say, you mean I'm not invited because I'm single? And they really do that. Another part of that, another thing we can do to make single people feel validated and treated more fairly is to ask them about the important people in their lives. You know how you meet someone who is coupled and you just routinely say, oh, how's Jeff doing? Or how's Marianne doing? Well, why not ask about single people's friends and the people who are important to them? Another thing, acknowledge their milestones and their achievements. Single people, like we used to stay single all our lives. We've never had, wedding celebrations. That's okay for me because I don't want that. But I do want my accomplishments to be acknowledged. I mean, publishing this Single at Heart book is like a huge thing to me. And I would like that to be a topic of congratulations, right? People who start a new job or get a new house, or one of my favorite ones is when people celebrate like 25 years of friendship. Well, I know from the stories I hear and a few of my own personal experiences that couple people will, or even people who aren't couple, will make this great effort to go to someone's wedding. Maybe they'll have to take the weekend off, or, it's going to cost them a lot. And they'll do it even if the people getting married aren't that close to them. It's like marriage, weddings are this big deal. But then they'll either bow out or, cancel at the last minute some celebration or event that some single person is hosting. That's really bad. That is a bad form. Don't do that.
Wonderful. Well, where can we find you? Where can we find the book? Tell us how to learn more.
Oh, great. Okay. So I have a website, belladepaulo.com. www.belladepaulo.com. That's BELLADEPAULO. Or easier to do, just Google Single at Heart. That's the name of my book, and I hope my website comes up when you Google that. So the book you can find in, of course, on Amazon, but I hope in lots of independent bookstores and all of your favorite ones. And if you go to a bookstore and they don't have it, tell them to order it because there is nothing else like that. If you want to hear a positive, affirming account of what it means to be single that's rooted in research, it's not just my opinion. There's nothing else like it. Get it and give it to all the people in your life who you surmise really like being single, or all the ones who can't fathom that anyone would find anything good about being single. Give it to them too.
Wonderful. Well, Bella, thank you so much for your work. It's important work. There's obviously the personal connection for me that makes it, even nearer and dearer to my heart. And so thank you very much for everything you're doing and for your message.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was really fun.
The Most Days Show is recorded in Boulder, Colorado, produced by Patrick Godino, music by Patrick Lee, and hosted by yours truly, Brent Franson, founder and CEO of Most Days.